My son pushed me off the boat into freezing water. I struggled for 10 minutes, lungs burning and failing. Later, his trust fund vanished. What I did made him weep. If you are reading this from a warm room or a moving bus or a crowded kitchen, tell me where you're watching from, because I want to picture a warmer place than the one where my story begins. The lake was a sheet of gray metal that morning. The air bit my cheeks, and there was the clean smell of pine and the dull, oil-sweet breath of the outboard. "You'll sign the villa to me after lunch," my son said, not asking. Ethan had that practiced, easy voice he used with bankers and waiters. He leaned on the rail. A light breeze pressed his hair against his forehead and made him look younger than he was. I kept both hands on the cold stainless steel and looked at the black water. "No," I said. Flat voice. A small word, a clean one. The boat rocked once, twice. Then his hands were on my chest and the rail bit my lower back and the sky fell away and the lake rose up like stone. The water closed over me and turned the world into iron. Cold has a sound. It rang in my skull like a low bell. My ribs tightened. A hard squeeze wrapped around my chest. I had taught him to swim here. I had said, "Kick, breathe, trust the line." Now I could not feel my legs and my arms were numb sticks hitting the water. I saw white bubbles, a stripe of light above, and for a breath I saw Lena on the old pier, our boy at 2, his fists grabbing water that ran through his fingers while he laughed, and she said, "He thinks he's holding it," and she tucked her shawl tighter around us because the wind was always a little mean on that point. I thought of the shawl while the lake pressed against my face like a heavy hand. I rolled, I looked for the boat. The motor hummed above me like an indifferent god. His shape stood for a second against the gray sky, a dark cutout framed by the rail. He looked down. He did not throw a buoy. He did not stop the engine. He vanished, I counted. Counting makes time into something you can touch. 1 to 60. Then again. My lungs burned and then turned to sand. My fingers found the mooring line like a vein, hard and ridged with old salt. I pulled, slow and stupid. The water bit the skin off my knuckles and I did not feel it. The cold crawled up my arms and set its teeth in my shoulders. I thought, "Not today, Ethan, you'd be in the way." The thought did not come from anger. Anger is hot. This was different. It was a stone in my pocket. It was weight. I hooked the line under my arm and kicked. Little weak kicks that would have embarrassed the version of me who taught boys to tread water. I heard the engine fade. I heard my own breath go thin. Then I was touching rock, and the rock was cruel and real, and my palms scraped on wet stone as I climbed the low bank like a man learning to stand. A fisherman in a brown coat was there, a simple man with red hands and wise eyes, and he looked at me like I was a puzzle. "You all right, sir?" he asked. I nodded because talking felt like lifting a car. "Eventually," I said. He walked me to his truck and draped a fleece over my shoulders and turned the heater on full, and I sat there and came back inch by inch. The lake breathed mist at the edge. The boat was a small dot near the west inlet, and it did not turn. I pressed my jaw until my teeth hurt. I did not shake my fist at the sky. I did not curse. I reached inside my jacket when my fingers woke and found the hard square of the tiny camera clipped there, because habit is a strange kind of angel. I had taken to clipping it when I ran in the morning. It was waterproof. It had a wide eye. I held it in my palm and felt the small battery warmth. "Okay," I said to myself and to the man and to the wind. Okay. The drive home was short. Lake roads are always shorter on the way back, like the land knows you didn't belong out there. I stepped into the kitchen wrapped in a stranger's fleece. It smelled like cinnamon and oil, because Grace was baking something sweet for the people upstairs who were not me. She raised a perfect brow. "What happened?" she asked, but it came out as a sentence, not a question. "He slipped," Ethan said from behind the island. His hair was already dry. He wore a clean sweater. He had that bored look he used when I told him to sort screws by size. "Dad's clumsy." I looked at his knuckles on the marble. The skin across the second joint was a little white, stretched like it had worked harder than he liked to admit. I did not look at his eyes, because if I saw what was in there, I might say something louder than I wanted to hear. The dining room once held banners Lena painted by hand for our boys' birthdays. She could never write straight, and every letter leaned toward the next like they were huddling for warmth. A smudge of ochre still lived on the molding if you knew where to look. Grace did not. "We changed the locks on the office," Ethan said, casual voice buttering his words. And let's move your things to the garden flat. It's warmer there for you. Grace handed me a thin white towel that would not have dried a cat. Don't drip, she said, her nose wrinkling like the smell offended her. Her parents, the Hales, sat at my table drinking my wine and looking at their phones. Give me 10 minutes to shower, I said. My voice was steady. The calm of ice is steady. He nodded like a king who had just granted mercy. Sure, Dad. Try not to slip. I walked past him and let my sleeve brush his sweater. He did not flinch. I did not either. Under the hot water, the cold left in waves that felt like pain. The mirror threw back a face I recognized and did not. Purple was waking under the skin across my ribs. A line of red marked where the rail had bitten. I watched my own eyes settle. Not anger. Something colder. Something that could hold a line straight. I dried the little camera with a towel and then with the hairdryer. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. I took a small knife from the drawer, the one Lena gave me on our 10th anniversary, and flicked the microcard into my palm. It was a piece of black plastic smaller than my fingernail. I held a storm in a speck. In the closet, I pushed past Lena's shawls and the old evening coat she wore twice, and the safe was behind them like a quiet animal. I spun the dial without looking because the numbers had moved into my fingers long ago. Inside were papers, trusts, corporate bylaws, a spare safety deposit key, and a tea tin with cardamom written in her quick hand. It still held the faint ghost of spice when I opened it. I slid the microcard into a case and into the tin and into my pocket. Down in the garden flat, my birthday sat on the doormat like a joke. A box with a space heater in it and no card. Saw your electric bill? Ethan said later when he came down with a smirk. This will help, old man. Old man. It hung between us like a bad smell. Upstairs, Grace posted a video to her followers, the dining room dressed in gold plates and crystal. The camera panned over a long table where someone had placed a card with Dad turned face down on the sideboard. The caption said, "Family only tonight." The word family did not mean what it used to in that house. I took the tiny camera and pulled a still frame from the video once I had it up on my laptop. My hands on the rail, his hands moving toward my chest. The push, a gray square of sky. I printed it on cheap paper and slid it behind the frame of Lena's portrait on the mantel. The paper made a soft whisper. Keep me honest, I said to her quiet eyes. I made tea and let it steep too long because sometimes bitterness fits the hour. I called the clinic and asked the doctor to record what happened this morning. The nurse wrote, near drowning, core temp dangerously low, hypothermia risk, lungs stressed. I asked them to be precise. Facts don't shout. They sit in files and wait. I texted Ruth. She had been with me since the first time I signed a loan with shaking hands. I wrote, need to activate decanting provisions quietly. Are you at your desk? She wrote back in 10 seconds, of course. Are you all right? I typed, cold clear. She sent a small thumbs up because she knew when not to say more. Laughter floated from upstairs like steam. To new management, Ethan's voice carried. A cork popped and bounced against the floorboard. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen holding a chipped mug, while Mr. Hale slid a folder across the counter toward me like a dealer with a bad hand. Sign these for the accountant, he murmured in that tone people use with small dogs. I opened the top page. A durable power of attorney, broad and greedy. Not today, I said, and my voice was flat like I was measuring wood. He blinked. People expect storm or surrender. Ice confuses them. I sent Ethan a calendar invite from the office computer. Annual trust distribution review, Monday, 10 a.m. Conference room A. Required, Ethan plus Grace plus Hales plus CFO plus bank. Casual dress. I put a tiny audio recorder by the kettle because truth lives in small rooms. Then I went down the back stairs and watched frost grow on the kitchen window as night came down and the house forgot me. Sunday morning he stood in my doorway with my mail under his arm like a guard. At the end of a shift. Sign this or move out, he said, not looking at me. Grace leaned on the hall wall, arms folded. He's not getting younger, Ethan, she said. We don't have time to wait for your dad's moods. Her parents smoothed their coats like they were on their way to a matinee. I let a full minute go by. Silence is a tool. You're not in the room you think you're in, I said finally, and watched that sentence fly past him without landing. I opened a shoebox on the shelf, the one with Lena's handwriting on the lid, for when words are not enough. and I took out a sealed letter with blue ink that wrote my name like a kiss. I put it in my inside pocket and felt the thump against my ribs like a small fist paying attention. "Tomorrow," I said. 10 a.m. He tried to stare me down. I smiled, slow, no teeth. His eyes slipped first. At dawn on Monday, the dock wore a thin halo of frost that made every rope look holy. The boat sat in its slip clean as a lie. I crouched and pulled the SD cards from the stern camera and the little one we keep in the bait well to catch thieves. They clicked into my pocket like little bones. I breathed the cold and watched it make smoke when it left me. I thought of Ethan at 12 with a bass in his small hands asking if he could brag, and me telling him not to gloat, to respect the water because it does not forgive. He had nodded too fast. I drove to the office with the heater on full, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee like it was a relic. Ruth was already there at 9 with 2 thick binders and a look on her face that said she had slept badly. "You're sure?" she asked as I took the chair. I nodded. "I'm sure." Binder 1 held the decanting plan. The Ethan Family Trust would pour into the Lena Foundation under reserved powers that I had never had to use. Binder 2 held board resolutions removing Ethan from any role that required judgment, because judgment had run away from him. We were not burning the house down. We were turning off the gas. Sheriff Dean waited in the hall outside Conference Room A with his hat in his hands and boots that still smelled like dust. "I'm here if you want me," he said. "I can be gone if you'd rather." He had a quiet look, the one my father called a neighbor look. "Stay," I said. "But stay quiet," he nodded. I did not ask him to arrest my son. I wanted Ethan to see the hat and the badge. I wanted him to know that truth wore shoes and came when called. The Hales arrived first with perfume and cologne like banners. Grace carried a bag that cost more than the first boat Lena and I bought with borrowed money. Ethan came last with a confident stride that faltered for a half-second when he saw me at the head of the table. "Make it quick," Mr. Hale said. "We have a showing at noon." "We'll be as quick as truth allows," I said and turned the tablet to face them. I pressed play. The room watched my hands on the rail. They watched Ethan behind me. They watched the push. The camera jostled and caught a slice of his face at the edge, a clean profile, and then the lens went gray and the world turned to bubbles. Grace made a sound in her throat, a small bird noise. "He slipped," she said, but her voice did not believe her. Mr. Hale said, "Angles can be faked," with his jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. Ethan said nothing. His color drained one layer at a time until he looked like a sketch. I set a second tablet down and tapped another clip from the stern camera. The same moment. A different angle. The sound of the engine. The noise of a body hitting water. A shape looking over the rail and then walking away. "I filed a report," I said flat. "I can withdraw it or not. That depends on future behavior." I let the sentence sit between us like a rock in the road. "This isn't anger." I tapped my chest with 2 fingers. "This is arithmetic." Binder 1 came open with a soft sound. "The Ethan Family Trust revoked this morning under reserved powers," I said. "Assets decanted to the Lena Foundation effective immediately." "You can't," Grace snapped, lips white at the edges. "He's entitled." I shook my head once. Entitlement is a story. This is paper. I slid copies of the trust language across to the bank rep and the CFO. Ruth cleared her throat. "Corporate Amex cards canceled as of 9 a.m., she said. "Direct deposits halted pending new compensation policy." Grace's phone chimed. She looked down and color left her face again. "Declined," she read, and her voice trembled like a string held too tight. "We'll sue," Mr. Hale hissed. "For elder abuse," Grace added quick. "You'll try," I said softly. "You'll fail." The sheriff took a slow breath but did not speak. Ethan's hands were flat on the table, palms down, like he was trying to hold the oak still. He was watching the wood grain as if it could open and swallow him. I took the sealed letter out of my inside pocket and slid it toward him. "From your mother," I said. His eyes flicked up like a child's. He did not touch it. "Read it when you can hear," I told him. Then I laid out a plain sheet of paper with a plan written on it in simple lines. "A modest living stipend will be considered after 6 months of verifiable work with the Lena Foundation's rescue team," I said. "Therapy required. Random checks, no cards, no offices, no keys. You're not a prisoner. You're a man being offered a door." He swallowed. "You're not going to press charges?" he asked, and his voice was a stranger in his mouth. Not today, I said. You'd be in the way of your own reckoning. He set his keys on the table. They sounded like a drawer closing. One by one, Grace and her parents chimed their anger into the air, but the room had changed temperature. Even the glass on the sideboard looked colder. We left conference room A with the sheriff's hat still in his hands and the CFO carrying the binders like a nurse with charts. At the villa, Grace stood at the threshold with her parents behind her like bookends and said, "You can't evict us." I held up the deed. "Title's in my name. You knew that." Her father puffed himself up. "We've invested in this home," he said. "Granite isn't an investment," I said, and walked past them. The carved banister was smooth under my hand. I had sanded it with Lena because we could not afford a new one, and we had laughed when the dust stuck to our eyelashes. "Our house," she had whispered that night, her forehead pressed to mine. It is. 48 hours, I said from the stairs, flat like a carpenter giving a measurement. Then the locks change. Grace pointed with eyes that glittered like glass at the safe behind the painting. "We want jewelry that's ours," she said. "You have what you came with," I said. "You leave with it." In the living room, I took the boat title out of the desk drawer and signed it over to the Lena Foundation. "She'll train lifeguards," I said to the room and to the woman in the frame, and to the water I could smell through the open window. "She'll pull people out when the cold takes them." I handed Ethan a card with the foundation director's number. "If you want the stipend on month 7, I said quietly, "you'll know where to be." He looked at the card like it burned. Grace hissed, "We're not taking charity." "It's not charity," I said. "It's penance with a paycheck." I placed a photograph face down on the hall table and walked away. Upstairs in our room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let my face fall into my hands for the first and only time that week. I thought of Lena, and how she would have wanted me to be kind and to be firm and to keep promises with teeth. I heard a door shut softly downstairs. Later, I would know it was Ethan, leaving the house for a while because he could not bear to be inside the place he had tried to steal. Days pass whether you are ready for them or not. The locks changed. The house grew quiet in a way that was not peace but was at least clean. The foundation's paperwork went through. The trust moved like a river into a new bed. The bank nodded. The board voted. The portrait of Lena moved to the foundation lobby, and the light there made her eyes warmer than they had looked in my house for a long time. Ruth brought me a stack of acknowledgments from small groups we had funded years ago. "People remember," she said. "They remember how you and Lena helped. They'll remember this," I nodded. I walked to the pier at dusk sometimes and stood where the boards creaked and thought of the cold, and I let that thought sharpen me and not break me. The sheriff sent me a copy of my own report and a note in his tight hand. "You call if you need to." I put it in the tea tin with the microcard because I like to keep truth together. 2 months later, the lake wore its winter fog like a scarf. The air went in and out of my chest like a sober friend. I stood on the pier in Lena's shawl, the one she used to wrap around both of us on cold nights when we believed the world loved people who loved it back. Footsteps came down the dock, slow, and stopped a board length behind me. Ethan, alone, thinner, eyes red. He did not come close to the edge. He stopped where the boards made that old complaining sound. "I read her letter," he said, and his voice was huskier, like he had used it too much crying and too little lying. "I started at the foundation. The first time we pulled a man out, He could not finish. He swallowed. The fog made a small halo around him. I remembered his first breath in the hospital, his tiny, angry cry, and how Lena had cried and laughed at once and put him in my arms and said, "We keep him safe," and I had said, "Even from himself, if we must," and we had meant it then without knowing what promise we were making. "I told the police the truth," he said to the boards. "I signed the statement Ruth drafted. I sent my apology to the board. I sent a longer one to you. You didn't answer. I let the fog be the clock. I let him feel the shape of his own words. I had read his apology. It was clumsy and raw and did not ask for anything, which is a kind of grace. You tried to drown me," I said, and watched him flinch like the words hit his skin. "You can't fix that with money. You can only fix yourself." He nodded. He had the letter in his hand, the blue ink now smudged at the fold. He looked down at it like a stump of a candle. The wind lifted the edge of the paper and set it down again. He looked at me the way boys do when they have fallen hard and come to the parent not for rescue but for direction. I reached in my coat and took out an envelope. "This is what I did," I said, and put it in his hand. He opened it on the pier. Inside was a certificate with the Lena Foundation at the top and a name in the middle. The first scholarship for a lifeguard trainee, funded entirely by what used to be his trust distribution, with the date of the morning I went into the lake embossed at the bottom. Behind it was a photograph of Lena holding him at the edge of this same pier when he was 4, his face pressed to her neck. On the back I had written, "Families don't push, they pull." He held the picture for a long time without breathing, and then he did something simple and rare. He cried, not loud at first, then louder. The kind of crying that folds a man without making him smaller. I did not touch him, not yet. The fog carried the sound toward the water, and the water held it. "I don't want the money," he said into the shawl between his fingers. "I want—" He could not finish that either. 6 months, I said. "Then we talk about work. Not money. You'll have earned that talk. Or you won't, that's on you." He nodded hard. "I work mornings on the rescue team," he said. "We go out when it's stupid cold to practice. We do pulls with a dummy, and last week a real man fell in by the rocks. He scared me. I kept seeing you. I kept hearing your voice saying, 'Respect the water.' I keep hearing Mom too. Her letter. She told me to stop trying to be a man people bow to and try to be a man people count on. She said money is a tool, not a leash. She said love is a promise with teeth. I didn't know what that meant." He wiped his face with both hands like he was washing in air. "I know a little now. I let that be enough." We stood there like that, 2 men on old wood, fog thick enough to erase the far bank, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like the house had a stranger in it. I did not forgive him in one stroke. Forgiveness is a craft, not a gift. But I put my hand on the rail where his had pushed. It was cold and honest. That week, the foundation christened the rescue boat with a simple little ceremony. No speeches. Just a name in blue paint, Lena, on the hull, and a handful of people who had been pulled out of bad waters there to see it. The first scholarship recipient shook my hand, and his palm was rough and warm, and he said, "Thank you," and eyed Ethan with a long look like he was trying to understand a man who gives back with what he tried to take. At night I sat in the house and the quiet felt different. Not empty, clean. The portrait in the lobby came home for a day for a cleaning and leaned against the dining room wall where the light warms in late afternoon, and for a moment I swore her painted eyes crinkled the way they used to when she was about to tease me. I said out loud, "We did all right, Len," and the room did not argue. The Hales sent a letter through a lawyer with too much perfume on the paper. I sent it to Ruth and she sent back a copy stamped received, and that was the end of that noise. Grace posted fewer videos. She blocked me, as if my eyes mattered in the ocean of strangers she wanted to show herself to. I did not miss the clips. I kept busy with the marina and the foundation and the 1,000 little chores that keep a man upright. There were nights I woke up with cold pressed into my ribs like a memory you can touch, and I would walk to the kitchen and drink water and stand by the back door and smell the pine and the lake and think about arithmetic and mercy. I thought a lot about stones. How they sink because that is their nature. How you can pick one up and put it in your pocket and carry it. And if you carry it long enough, it can make you stand straighter. One late afternoon, as the first taste of spring came in on a soft wind, Ethan stood in the doorway of my workshop with grease on his hands and a grin I recognized from a long time ago. "The motor coughed," he said, and I didn't panic. And he laughed at himself because the old Ethan would have blamed the boat and the water and the weather and the mechanic. The new Ethan took a rag from the pegboard without asking. "You taught me to keep my tools where I can see them," he said, "so I don't grab a hammer when I need a screwdriver." "You learning that on the water?" I asked, and he nodded. "On the water," he said, and his eyes were steady. That night we ate soup at the kitchen table and did not talk about money. We talked about wind and knots, and the kind of courage that looks like doing something. Boring the right way every day. Carried the scholarship certificate in my pocket for a week, after the pier, because I liked the way it felt against my heart. I put the photograph back on the mantel with the still frame from the video behind it, where only I can see it and be reminded of what happened and of what did not happen because of it. I think sometimes about that morning and the 10 minutes in water, and what kind of man comes back from that colder and cleaner than he went in. I think about my wife and the promises we made to each other to make our house into a place where people felt like they belonged. I remember her making one extra setting at every dinner for the person who forgot they belonged. and how there was always someone who needed that chair. I keep an extra chair in the kitchen now too. Sometimes it stays empty, sometimes he sits in it. This is not a story about punishment. It is a story about lines. You draw them or you drown. I drew them without shouting. I use paper because paper has teeth. I use truth because truth wears shoes and will stand in a hallway with a hat in his hands and wait as long as you need. I used my wife's memory like a compass, not a weapon. I made my son weep, but not because I hurt him. Because I showed him what it meant to lose and still be offered a door with a knob he could turn. Because I took what he thought he deserved and turned it into something that could pull strangers out of cold water on bad days. Families don't push, they pull. If this story met you in a warm room or on a train or in a quiet moment, tell me where you're watching from, and if it settled somewhere inside you, like, share, comment, and subscribe.